The thing about the border country is that sound travels wrong. Captain Aldridge told me that my first morning at Fort Kearny. Told me the way a man warns you about bad water or a sniper's range. Sound carries 15 miles on a clear night, he said. You'll hear things that aren't there, and you won't hear things that are. I was Lieutenant James Holloway then, fresh from infantry school at West Point, assigned to command 3rd Patrol along the Dakota-Montana territorial line. 23 years old, and certain I understood the West because I'd read Colonel Dodge's memoirs. The fort held 63 men that winter, stretched across a defensive position that should have required 200. We patrolled 400 square miles of grassland and ravine country, with inadequate horses, obsolete Springfield rifles, and maps that contradicted themselves every 40 miles. My patrol consisted of 8 men. Sergeant Barrow had 17 years on the frontier. Sioux campaigns, Apache scouts, the railroad surveys. He wore his beard long in the cavalry style, and spoke less than any man I'd known. The others were territory recruits, farm boys, drifters, one former railroad man named Cullen, who'd lost 3 fingers to frostbite the previous winter. We rode out every 4th day. Standard patrol, northeast along Ash Creek, check the line stations, return via the ridge route. 40 miles in 18 hours. The land was empty in the way that unmakes men. Not empty like a room. Empty like a mouth open to swallow sound. Grass ran to the horizon in all directions, broken only by coulees and the skeletal shapes of burnt cottonwoods where lightning had struck. It was Cullen who found the first marker. We'd stopped to water the horses at Dutch Henry's Creek, a tributary so thin it barely qualified as running water. Cullen had wandered 20 yards downstream to fill canteens when he called out. Not shouted. Called in that careful way men use when they don't want to alarm, but need you to come quickly. The marker was a pyramid of stones, each roughly the size of a man's head, stacked 7 high. Balanced. The top stone had been placed with such precision that it sat without mortar or mud, simply resting on the apex of the stone beneath. Sioux? I asked. Barrow circled the structure, studying it from multiple angles. No. Cheyenne, then. Arapaho. No, sir. I waited for elaboration. None came. Barrow crouched, examining the ground around the base. The earth showed no footprints, no scuff marks. 8 stones, each requiring 2 hands to lift, stacked in open grassland with no indication of how they'd arrived. Could have been here for years, I said. Barrow touched one stone, testing its stability. The entire structure held firm. Wasn't here last patrol. We watered at this exact spot. Animals might have. Animals don't stack stones, Lieutenant. Private Mercer, youngest of the detail, had his rifle half raised. Should we knock it down? Something in Barrow's posture changed, a stiffness. No. It's a territorial marker of some kind, I said. We'll note the location and report when we return. We rode on. The patrol continued without incident. We checked Line Station 7, abandoned since August, as expected. We found the remains of a deer, predator killed, normal. We saw no humans, hostile or otherwise. Standard patrol in all respects. Except for the sound that night. We made camp in a ravine 12 miles from the fort, using the depression for wind protection. Standard cold camp. No fires this close to potential hostile country. We posted watches in 2-hour rotations. I took the midnight watch with Private Doyle, a Wisconsin boy who still wrote letters to his mother twice monthly. The sound began at 1:30. Grinding. A low, continuous scraping, like millstones turning without grain. It seemed to come from the northeast, from the open grass beyond the ravine's lip. Not loud. Volume wasn't the disturbing element. It was the consistency. Mechanical in its rhythm, unvarying in pitch. Doyle heard it the same moment I did. We both turned toward the sound, rifles ready. Mill? Doyle whispered. There's no mill within 60 miles. The sound continued. 30 seconds. 45. Then it stopped with the abruptness of a door closing. Silence rushed back. The kind of silence that makes you aware of your own pulse. Should we wake the sergeant? I considered. We'd heard a sound. No movement, no threat. Waking the detail for an unexplained noise seemed the act of a green officer jumping at shadows. We'll mention it at dawn, I said. Doyle nodded, unconvinced. The sound came again at 3:15, this time closer. Same grinding quality, same mechanical rhythm, but perhaps a quarter-mile nearer. It lasted 1 full minute before ceasing. At dawn, I reported it to Barrow. Grinding? He asked. Like stones turning against stones. Something moved across his face. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. You've heard it before, I said. Barrow began saddling his horse with deliberate motions. We should return to the fort. We have 8 hours remaining in patrol. Yes, sir. Then we'll complete patrol. He tightened the saddle girth, testing the leather. Captain Aldridge will want to hear about the marker and the sound. Captain Aldridge will hear our full report at the scheduled time. Barrow met my eyes then. In 17 years of frontier service, he perfected the art of respectful insubordination. Permission to speak, Lieutenant. Granted. Things go wrong out here in specific ways. Slow at first. Easy to dismiss. The men who survive are the ones who notice when the wrongness starts. You're saying a pile of stones and an odd sound constitute wrongness. I'm saying we should return to the fort. I was 23 years old. I'd been taught that authority meant certainty. The command meant never revealing doubt. We complete patrol, I said. We rode north. The second marker appeared at noon. Same configuration. 7 stones pyramided with impossible balance, standing in open grassland where we'd passed a dozen times before. This one was positioned on a low rise, visible for half a mile in every direction. No one spoke when we found it. The men sat their horses in a loose circle around the structure, and I felt the question they weren't asking. Do we acknowledge that this is impossible? Or do we pretend stone pyramids appear naturally on the prairie? Cullen dismounted without orders. He approached the marker and placed both hands against the base stone, pushing. The structure didn't shift. Embedded, he said. Bottom stone sunk at least 6 inches into hardpan. How long would that take? I asked. To dig in this soil? 2 men with proper tools, maybe an hour. He circled the marker. No dig marks, no tool scrapes. Grounds undisturbed. Private Mercer's horse stamped, nervous. It's watching us. It's stones, I said. No, sir. It's watching. You can feel it. I could. That was the worst part. 7 balanced stones in empty country, and some quality of their arrangement suggested intention. Observation. Barrow sat his horse at a distance, studying not the marker, but the surrounding terrain. We're being positioned, he said. Explain. First marker at the creek, second marker here. We're being moved. Herded. Herded by stones? By whoever's placing them. It was sound logic. Tactical logic. If I'd been planning an ambush, I might leave markers to guide an enemy patrol into a kill zone. Draw them forward with curiosity. Position them where they're vulnerable. We'll proceed to line station 9, I said. Northern route, avoiding the obvious path between markers. Barrow nodded, almost approval. We rode west, then north, making a wide arc that kept us away from the direct line between the 2 stone pyramids. The grassland opened before us in rolling swells. October weather, cold at night, tolerable by day, but with an edge that promised winter. We saw no game. No birds. That should have registered more clearly, but I was focused on the tactical problem, watching for positions of ambush, counting sight lines, estimating range. Line Station 9 was a sod structure dug into a hillside, reinforced with timber from the creek bottoms. Abandoned, like the others. We found the door open, hanging on leather hinges. Inside, standard-issue equipment. Table, 2 chairs, a cold stove. Stacked firewood that hadn't been touched. Blankets folded in the corner. And on the table, arranged in a perfect line, 7 stones. Not pyramided, not stacked. Lined up with the precision of a military inspection. Each stone identical in size, spaced exactly 3 inches apart. They were inside, Doyle whispered. Cullen backed toward the door. We should go, right now. I approached the table. The stones were smooth, water-worn, the kind you'd find in any creek bed. Nothing remarkable except their arrangement. Except the fact that Line Station 9 had been locked and empty 4 days prior, and now 7 stones sat in parade formation on government furniture. Barrow stood in the doorway, rifle ready, watching the grassland beyond. Lieutenant, we need to make a decision. What decision? Run or fight? Fight what? Stones? Whatever's placing them. I lifted one of the stones. Ordinary weight, ordinary temperature. I set it down outside the doorway, breaking the pattern. There, I said. If someone's trying to frighten us with arrangements, we'll disarrange them. No one looked reassured. We rode out, continuing patrol. The afternoon stretched long. Empty country, no movement except wind in the grass. We should have encountered something, antelope, coyotes, at minimum the hawks that circled these grasslands hunting mice. Nothing. The sky was empty. The land was empty. At 4 o'clock, Private Hayes's horse went lame. Sudden, severe. One moment normal gait, the next limping badly, unwilling to bear weight. Hayes dismounted, checking the hoof. Stone bruise, maybe, or a fracture. We stopped while he examined the animal. Standard procedure. Redistribute Hayes's gear. Double mount him with another rider. It would slow us, but we'd reach the fort by midnight. That's when Mercer said, "Where's Doyle?" We'd been 9 men. Now we were 8. He was rear guard, Cullen said. 20 yards back. I turned. The grassland behind us was empty. No horse, no rider. No indication anyone had been there. "Doyle!" I called. The wind took my voice and scattered it. Barrow was already moving, riding back along our trail at a trot. I followed. The rest of the detail held position, weapons ready. We found Doyle's horse a quarter-mile back, standing riderless, reins trailing. The animal was calm, cropping grass, undisturbed. Doyle's rifle was still in its saddle scabbard. His canteen still hung from the saddle horn. Of Doyle himself, nothing. He wouldn't dismount without orders, I said. Barrow circled the area in widening rings, reading the ground. No struggle. No prints except the horses. It's like he stopped. Like he what? Like he was lifted. The grinding sound began then. Mid-afternoon, full sunlight, and that low mechanical scraping rolled across the grassland from everywhere and nowhere. Closer than before. Much closer. And beneath it, almost imperceptible, another sound. Breathing. Enormous. Slow. Barrow's horse reared. My own mount fought the bit, wild-eyed. The sound stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard my own heartbeat. Heard the leather creak of Barrow's saddle. Heard nothing else. No insects. No wind. Nothing. "Fort," Barrow said. "Now." This time I didn't argue. We rode hard. Not a rout. Barrow wouldn't permit that. But a controlled withdrawal that felt dangerously close to panic. Hayes doubled with Cullen. Doyle's horse followed riderless, responding to herd instinct. The sun dropped toward the horizon, and the shadows lengthened in the wrong directions. That's the only way I can describe it. The angle of light was correct for late October afternoon, but the shadows fell as if the sun occupied a different position entirely. They stretched northeast when they should have pointed east. Small wrongness, easy to dismiss as exhaustion or fear, except all of us saw it. "Don't look at the shadows," Barrow said. His voice was steady, but I heard the effort that steadiness required. "Watch the horizon. Watch for movement." At 6 miles from the fort, we found the third marker. It stood directly in our path. Same 7-stone pyramid, perfectly balanced. But this one was different, larger. The base stone was the size of a grain barrel. The top stone, balanced impossibly on the apex, was a smooth sphere of granite that would have required 4 men to lift. We stopped. "Go around," I ordered. We circled the marker at 50 yards distance. It remained motionless, but I felt its presence the way you feel a held breath. The moment before something breaks. At 4 miles from the fort, Cullen's horse stumbled. The animal recovered, but Cullen himself made a small sound. Half gasp, half sob. "What?" I asked. He pointed. Behind us, visible on the ridge we'd crossed 2 miles back, stood a figure. Distance made details impossible. Man-shaped, tall, motionless. It stood in full silhouette against the darkening sky, positioned exactly where we'd be able to see it. "Hostile?" Hayes asked. Barrow studied the figure through the long twilight. "No." "Then what?" "I don't know." We rode on. When I looked back 5 minutes later, the figure was gone. But on the next ridge, closer now, another stood. Same height. Same impossible stillness. "They're hurting us," Barrow said. "Pushing us toward the fort." "That's where we're going anyway." "Yes, sir. Question is why they want us there." The grinding sound returned at 3 miles from Fort Kearny. Loud now. Close enough that I could feel it in my chest. A vibration that matched no natural phenomenon. The horses screamed. Mercer's mount bolted, and it took him 200 yards to regain control. "Steady," Barrow commanded. "We break formation, we die out here." I don't know how he knew that, but we all believed him. The figures multiplied. 6 of them now, positioned on rises and high ground, forming a perimeter that tightened as we moved. They never advanced, never closed distance, simply stood, watching, as we fled toward the fort. At 1 mile, Hayes said, "Oh Christ," and I looked where he was staring. The stone markers had multiplied, dozens of them. Small pyramids scattered across the grassland between us and Fort Kearny, each perfectly balanced, each impossible. They formed no pattern I could recognize, or they formed a pattern too large for me to comprehend from ground level. We rode between them. I ordered the men to look straight ahead, to focus on the fort's outline now visible in the dusk. But I couldn't follow my own order. I watched those stones as we passed, and they felt arranged, intentional. We were being guided through a specific path, and every instinct I possessed screamed that we shouldn't comply. But what choice did we have? The figures stood behind us. The grinding sound pressed from all sides. The only way was forward. Fort Kearny's gates were open. Torches burned on the walls. I could see men moving on the ramparts, our garrison, waiting. We crossed the final 100 yards at a gallop. The gates closed behind us with a sound like finality. Captain Aldridge met us in the yard. He took one look at our detail, 8 men instead of 9, horses lathered and wild-eyed, and his expression hardened. "Report," he said. I told him. The markers, the sound, Doyle's disappearance, the figures on the ridges. Aldridge listened without interruption. When I finished, he turned to Barrow. "Sergeant?" "Everything he said, sir. All true." Aldridge was quiet for a long moment. Then, "How many stone markers did you count?" "3 large ones," I said. "Perhaps 40 smaller." "And the figures? You saw them clearly?" "Silhouettes only. Distance prevented detail." Aldridge nodded slowly. "Come with me, Lieutenant. Sergeant Barrow, see to the men and horses." He led me to his quarters, a log structure that served as office, sleeping room, and map repository. He lit a second lamp and retrieved a leather portfolio from a locked cabinet. "3 other patrols have reported similar encounters," he said, "starting in August. First patrol lost 2 men. Second patrol lost 1. Third patrol returned intact, but—" he paused. "Changed." "Changed how?" Private Denton stopped speaking. Completely. Hasn't said a word in 6 weeks. Corporal Hughes requested transfer to any post more than 300 miles from this location. And Lieutenant Barclay— Aldridge hesitated. Barclay insisted something followed him back. Not followed the patrol. Followed him specifically. He could feel it watching from outside the fort. Where is Barclay now? Dead. Found him in his quarters 3 weeks ago. No wound, no sign of violence. The doctor ruled heart failure. But Barclay was 28 years old and fit for duty. Aldridge opened the portfolio. Inside were sketches, dozens of them. Drawings of stone markers, identical to the ones we'd seen. Maps showing patrol routes with positions marked where the structures had appeared. "They're spreading," Aldridge said. "Each patrol reports them farther south, closer to the fort. And the figures." He showed me a sketch rendered in charcoal, man-shaped, tall. But the proportions were wrong in ways I couldn't immediately identify. Too narrow through the torso, arms slightly too long. "Who drew this?" I asked. "Lieutenant Barclay, 2 days before he died." I studied the image. The figure in the sketch stood in the same position I'd seen on the ridge, motionless, observing. "What do you think they are?" I asked. Aldridge closed the portfolio. "I think they're old, Lieutenant. Older than the tribes. Older than the frontier. I think they were here before us, and they object to our presence." "That's not a military assessment." "No," Aldridge agreed. "It's not." Outside, full dark had fallen. I could hear the sentries calling watch changes, the normal sounds of a garrison settling for night. Ordinary routine in ordinary time. Except I could feel it now, the thing Barclay had felt. Attention. Something vast and patient and utterly inhuman, watching from the darkness beyond the fort's walls. "We can't patrol," I said. "Not if every detail loses men." "We must patrol. Those are our orders. 400 square miles of territorial line to secure." "Against what? Hostiles who don't exist? We haven't encountered a single Sioux, Cheyenne, or Arapaho in 3 months. The tribes have abandoned this country." "Yes," Aldridge said quietly. "They have. Question is, what did they know that we don't?" A sound reached us then. Distant, barely audible, but unmistakable. Grinding, low and continuous, coming from somewhere beyond the fort's northeast wall. It lasted 30 seconds, then stopped. In my quarters that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my bunk and listened to the silence, and the silence felt crowded, full of presence. At some point near dawn, I rose and looked out the window. On the hillside 300 yards from the fort, barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness, stood 7 figures, man-shaped, motionless, watching. I blinked and they were gone. But on my windowsill, someone had placed a single stone. Smooth, water-worn, ordinary in every way except its presence. I hadn't heard the window open, hadn't heard anyone approach. The stone sat there, and I understood with absolute certainty. They could reach us whenever they wanted. The fort's walls meant nothing. Our rifles meant nothing. We were being permitted to remain. For now. Like it was placing them intentionally, not walking, positioning. That afternoon, Private Denton, the soldier who'd stopped speaking after his patrol encounter, began screaming. It started during mess, a sudden shriek that emptied the dining hall. He stood at the table, rigid, staring at nothing, and screamed until his voice broke. Dr. Brennan sedated him. When Denton woke 4 hours later, he was calm, silent again. But he'd torn his own fingernails bloody against the cell wall, and in the blood he'd drawn the same symbol over and over. 7 circles arranged in a pyramidal pattern. "The markers," I said. Brennan nodded. "He's trying to tell us something. Or show us what he can't unsee." That night, I stood watch on the northeast wall. Clear sky, 3/4 moon. Visibility good. I could see perhaps half a mile into the grassland, though the shadows made depth difficult to judge. At 10 o'clock, the grinding sound returned, but this time I saw the source. It moved across the grassland at walking pace, following the line Barrow had identified that morning. The moonlight showed me shape without detail. Tall, narrow, moving with a gait that wasn't walking. More like folding. As though its legs bent in directions legs shouldn't bend, and what I interpreted as forward motion was actually something folding itself through space. I raised my rifle, aimed, fired. The shot was clean. 70 yards, center mass, no wind. I'd hit targets at twice that distance on the practice range. The figure stopped. It turned, or seemed to turn. The motion was wrong, too fluid, and faced me directly. I fired again, and again. 4 shots total. The figure remained motionless. Then it moved, not away, but perpendicular. A lateral shift of 15 feet in less than a second, without crossing the intervening space. It was simply in one location, then another, as though the distance between positions was optional. Other sentries had gathered, weapons ready. "Did you hit it?" Cullen asked. "I don't know." The figure, and I hesitate to call it that, because the longer I watched, the less human it appeared, began moving again. Circling, maintaining its distance with precision. "It's avoiding our range," Barrow said from behind me, "staying just outside effective fire." "Then it understands firearms." "Yes, sir, it understands." At dawn, we found my spent cartridges on the rampart where I'd stood. And below, pressed into the earth at the base of the wall, a new marker. 7 stones, pyramided with perfect balance, positioned exactly where I'd been standing when I fired. A message, or a marker, or both. Aldridge called assembly that morning. All able personnel, 54 men after casualties and medical exemptions, formed ranks in the yard. He climbed to the rampart and addressed us. "No one is to fire on the figures unless they breach the walls," he said. "That's an order. We're dealing with something that anticipates our tactics and responds to aggression. Until I understand its intentions, we defend only." "Sir," I said, "what if its intention is to wait?" "Then we wait better." But waiting had costs. That night, 3 more horses died. Private Mercer was found unconscious at his post, uninjured but unresponsive. And at midnight, the grinding sound surrounded the fort. Not from one direction, but from all sides simultaneously, as though multiple sources had taken positions in a coordinated perimeter. It lasted 10 minutes. When it stopped, the silence felt accusatory. I found Aldridge in his quarters, staring at maps that offered no solutions. "We're under siege," I said, "by an enemy we can't identify, can't engage, and can't escape. Request to division headquarters for reinforcement? Already sent. But Fort Lincoln is 10 days away at best. In this weather, possibly 3 weeks. Do we have 3 weeks?" Aldridge didn't answer immediately. He looked at me with the expression of a man watching something break in slow motion. "No," he finally said. "I don't believe we do." On the 8th day, the figures came closer. Not all at once. Throughout the day they appeared on the surrounding rises, first 3, then 7, then too many to count accurately. By dusk, we had 26 confirmed positions, each occupied by a motionless figure maintaining perfect stillness. They stood at 300 yards, well within rifle range. Aldridge ordered no one to fire. The restraint cost us. I could see it in the men's faces, the way fear turns to anger when it has no outlet. They wanted to shoot, wanted to do something, and standing watch while those things observed us violated every instinct of action and control. At sunset, one of the figures moved, not toward the fort, laterally, circling to a new position with that same disturbing gait, the folding motion that suggested joints in wrong locations. It repositioned itself directly north of the main gate, centered on our sightline. Then it stood still again. "What's it doing?" Cullen asked from the wall beside me. "Showing us it can move freely, that our weapons haven't deterred it. We should fire, all of us, concentrated volley." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe that's what it wants." I'd been thinking about that, about the way these things had responded to aggression, not with retreat, but with approach. The figures had stayed distant until we fired artillery, then they'd close the perimeter. What would happen if we opened up with coordinated rifle fire? At 10 o'clock that night, we found out. A shot cracked from the eastern wall, then another. I ran toward the sound and found Private Hayes leveling his Springfield at the nearest figure, firing methodically. "Hold fire!" I shouted. Hayes fired again. "It killed Doyle. They killed Doyle and the horses, and they're just standing there." Barrow reached him first, forcing the rifle down. "Stand down, Private." But the damage was done. The figures moved. All of them. Simultaneously. Not toward the fort, but in a synchronized lateral shift, repositioning themselves in a pattern I couldn't immediately parse. They formed a configuration, 7 groups of 3, plus 5 individuals positioned at specific points. From ground level it looked random, but I had the terrible suspicion that from above, from their perspective, it formed a shape, a symbol. The grinding sound began, louder than ever before, and beneath it, that breathing, deep and slow and utterly wrong, because nothing that large should be able to hide in open grassland under moonlight. "They're showing us," Barrow said. His voice was tight. "This is what they are, what they can do." The sound stopped. In the silence, a new noise emerged. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Approaching the northeast wall, we saw nothing. No movement in the grassland. But the sound continued. Measured steps, each impact audible, each one closer. The sentries tracked the sound with their rifles, aiming at empty space. The footsteps reached the wall. Something touched the exterior. We heard it. A scraping sound, like stone dragged across timber. It moved along the wall's length, circling the fort. That same unhurried pace. I was on the rampart. I leaned over, looking down. Nothing. The base of the wall was empty. But the scraping continued, moving past directly below my position, and I swear I felt the wall shift. Just slightly. A vibration. "Lieutenant," Cullen whispered. "Look at the shadows." I looked. The shadows cast by our torches, shadows that should have pointed outward from the wall, were bending, curving inward, as though something massive stood just beyond the light's reach, distorting the darkness around itself. The footsteps completed their circuit and stopped at the main gate. Silence. Then a sound I'll hear until I die. Knocking. 3 measured impacts against the gate's timber. The polite knock of a visitor seeking entry. No one moved. No one breathed. The knocking repeated. 3 measured impacts. Patient. Aldridge appeared beside me on the rampart. "Can you see it?" "No, sir." "But you can feel it?" "Yes." "So can I." The knocking came a third time. Then the sound withdrew, footsteps receding, moving back toward the grassland. Within moments the noise had faded entirely. The figures on the ridges remained motionless. "What was that?" someone asked. Aldridge's voice was steady, but I heard the effort. "A demonstration. They're showing us they can touch our walls, can reach our gates, that they choose not to enter." "Why?" I asked. "I don't know, but I suspect we won't like the answer." At dawn, we found new markers. Not stone pyramids this time. These were different. 7 wooden stakes had been driven into the ground in a line approaching the northeast wall. Each stake was approximately 4 feet tall, stripped of bark, planted in perfectly measured intervals. They formed a path, not to the gate, but to a section of wall between 2 guard positions. "They're marking something," Barrow said. "Or indicating," Aldridge replied. "This is where they'll enter if they choose to." "We could reinforce that section, double the guard." "To what end, Sergeant? If they wanted to breach the wall, they'd have done it already. They're making a point." "What point?" Aldridge studied the stakes, his expression unreadable. "That our defenses are theater. That they permit our presence here. For now." That day, 4 more horses died. Private Mercer remained unconscious. Dr. Brennan reported that Denton had stopped eating. And at noon, a sound came from outside the walls. Not grinding or breathing, but something worse. Singing. Human voices. Or sounds shaped like human voices. A melody without words, harmonized in impossible intervals. It came from the northeast, from the direction of those 7 stakes, and it lasted 3 minutes before stopping abruptly. "Did anyone recognize that tune?" Aldridge asked. No one had. Because it wasn't music designed for human ears. It had structure, had rhythm, but existed in some tonal framework we weren't built to process. After it ended, Private Cullen vomited. Corporal Hayes reported a severe headache that lasted for hours. And I found myself unable to remember what the melody had sounded like. Only that I'd heard it, and that hearing it had felt like violation. That night I returned to my quarters and found the stone on my windowsill had been moved. Not removed. Moved 6 inches to the left. I hadn't heard the window open, hadn't heard anyone enter, but something had been here, in my room, while I'd been standing watch on the wall. I checked the door, locked from the inside. The window, closed and latched. I was 3 stories up. The stone sat on the sill, and beneath it, scratched into the wood with something sharp, was a symbol. 7 circles in a pyramidal pattern. The same mark Denton had drawn in blood. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my desk with my service revolver loaded and ready, watching the window, watching the door, watching empty space that might contain something I couldn't see. At dawn, the figures were gone. All of them. The ridges stood empty under morning light. No sound. No presence. The relief lasted exactly 4 minutes. Then Private Denton began screaming again, and this time the words were intelligible. "They're inside. They've always been inside. We let them in the moment we came here." Dr. Brennan sedated him, but the words echoed. Because I realized Denton was right. We hadn't encountered them out there. We'd entered their territory. And everything since, the markers, the sounds, the demonstrations, hadn't been attacks. They'd been warnings. On the 9th day, we found Hayes in the stable. He'd hanged himself from a rafter beam using his own belt. Standard suicide except for one detail. His eyes were open. And in the dirt floor beneath his suspended feet, someone had arranged stones in that familiar pattern. 7 of them. Pyramided. Dr. Brennan cut him down. I helped carry the body to the infirmary, and I remember thinking Hayes weighed less than he should, as though something had been extracted. That afternoon, 3 soldiers requested transfer. Aldridge denied all requests. We were undermanned already. He couldn't spare personnel, even if transfer were logistically possible. Which it wasn't. No supply trains were running. No couriers had arrived in 2 weeks. Fort Kearny had become an island surrounded by grassland instead of water. At dusk, the figures returned. More of them this time. I counted 47 distinct positions before losing track. They stood closer now, 200 yards, just beyond comfortable rifle range. Close enough to see details if there had been details to see. But even with field glasses, they remained silhouettes. Shape without substance. "They're waiting for something," Barrow said. "Or waiting us out," I replied. The horses were gone. All of them. 26 dead, the rest we'd put down out of mercy when they started to scream in their stalls. No horses meant no patrols, no courier service, no escape if escape became necessary. We were static, trapped in place. At midnight, the grinding sound resumed. But this time it came from beneath us, from under the fort itself. A deep vibration that resonated through the timber foundations and made the floor feel unstable. Men stumbled from their bunks, disoriented. The sound wasn't loud. Volume wasn't the problem. It was the fact that we could feel it in our bones, in our teeth, a frequency that bypassed ears and went directly into the body. It lasted 10 minutes. When it stopped, we discovered cracks in the foundation walls. Small ones. Hairline fractures in the stone and mortar. Structurally insignificant. But they hadn't been there before. "They can reach us underground," Aldridge said. He stood in the foundation cellar, examining the cracks by lantern light. We assumed walls and elevation provided security. We were wrong. "What do they want?" I asked. "I've been asking that question for 6 weeks, Lieutenant. I'm no closer to an answer." "Then we need to ask them." Aldridge looked at me. "Explain." "They've demonstrated intelligence, pattern behavior, communication through symbols. What if we respond? What if we engage on their terms instead of ours?" "Engage how?" "The stone markers. They leave them in specific arrangements. What if we alter one? Not destroy, alter. Show we understand their communication." Barrow, who'd been silent until then, spoke. "Or we provoke them." "They're already provoked," I said. "We're occupying their territory. Every day we remain here is provocation. But they haven't attacked, haven't breached the walls. They're waiting for something. Response, recognition, I don't know. But doing nothing is killing us by degrees." Aldridge considered. The lantern cast shadows that made his face look older than his 40 years. "All right," he said. "At dawn, you and Sergeant Barrow, approach the nearest marker. Don't destroy it. Don't touch the stones. But place something nearby. Something that shows intentional arrangement. A mirror pattern, perhaps. Let them know we see them. And if they respond? Retreat immediately to the fort." At first light, Barrow and I walked out through the main gate. Aldridge had ordered covering fire positions on the walls. 12 rifles trained on the grassland, ready if the figures moved. The nearest marker stood 70 yards from the gate. 7 stones, pyramided, perfect balance. We'd watched it appear 3 days prior. No one had seen it built, but at dawn it had simply been there. We stopped 10 feet away. The stones looked ordinary in morning light. Water-worn granite, each roughly the same size. Nothing remarkable except their arrangement. Except the fact that they stood in open grassland 70 yards from a United States military fortification without explanation. "What now?" Barrow asked. I removed 7 cartridges from my ammunition pouch. Brass casings, empty, fired rounds I'd saved. I placed them on the ground in a mirrored pattern. 7 cartridges arranged opposite the stone marker, forming an inverted pyramid. "There," I said. "Human pattern. Shows we understand arrangement. Shows we can communicate in symbol." We retreated to the fort. The figures on the ridges remained motionless. No immediate response. We watched from the walls as the sun climbed, illuminating the grassland. Both markers visible, stone pyramid and brass pyramid, facing each other across empty ground. At noon, something moved between them. Not one of the figures, something else. It appeared in the space between markers, a distortion, like heat shimmer on summer roads, except the day was cold. The air folded somehow, and through the fold I glimpsed darkness. Not shadow darkness, absence. A space where light went but didn't return. The distortion lasted 5 seconds, then collapsed, leaving behind a new arrangement. The stone pyramid was gone. In its place, 7 brass cartridges, the ones I'd placed. They'd been moved, relocated to exactly where the stones had stood. And where my cartridges had been, 7 stones now sat in their place. Perfect exchange. Perfect inversion. They answered, Barrow said. Yes. What does it mean? I stared at the swapped markers. They can manipulate objects without touching them, can swap positions instantaneously, and they understand reciprocity. That's not an answer. That's a demonstration of capability. He was right. We'd asked a question and received a magic trick. But there was meaning in the exchange. They'd taken something human, brass cartridges, products of industry and warfare, and placed them in the pattern we'd recognized as theirs. And they'd taken their stones and put them where we'd arranged our pattern. They're showing us they can mirror, I said. They can imitate. Maybe that's what they are, reflections. Not beings in themselves, but responses, reactions to our presence. Barrow gave me a look that suggested I was reaching. Maybe I was. But something about the exchange felt like communication, like progress. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, Private Denton died. His heart simply stopped, according to Dr. Brennan. No wound. No prior symptom beyond the psychological collapse. He died silently, in restraints, his eyes open. On the cell wall above his bed, someone had drawn a new symbol. Not the pyramid of circles this time. This was different. A spiral that seemed to curve in directions that hurt to follow. I stared at it for perhaps 30 seconds before vertigo forced me to look away. Did Denton draw that? I asked. Brennan shook his head. He was restrained, couldn't reach the wall. Then who? Neither of us wanted to answer that question. At dusk, the markers had multiplied. Not 7, not 20. Hundreds. They covered the grassland around Fort Kearny in every direction. Stone pyramids and brass pyramids, alternating in a pattern that was either completely random or so complex I couldn't parse it. They're surrounding us, Cullen said from the wall. They've always surrounded us, I replied. Now they're showing us they know we're listening. That night the singing returned, but this time we recognized it. It was our songs, garrison songs. The drinking ballads we sang in the mess, the hymns some men sang on Sunday, the work chants we used for coordinated labor. Our music, our voices. But wrong, harmonized in those impossible intervals, sung in registers that scraped against hearing. They were mirroring us, learning us, reflecting human sound through something inhuman. The singing lasted 20 minutes. When it stopped, I realized I'd been weeping. Not from sadness, from some emotion I had no name for. Dread mixed with recognition, mixed with the terrible understanding that we'd been heard. Completely. Totally. In ways we never consented to. Aldridge found me on the wall afterward. We're leaving, he said. Sir? Tomorrow, first light. Everyone who can walk. We take what we can carry and we march south. The orders? Damn the orders, Lieutenant. This post is forfeit. Has been since we first encountered those things. I won't wait for relief that might not come. I won't watch my men die by degrees while something we don't understand picks us apart. They'll follow us. Maybe, but movement is survival. Staying here is slow death. He was right. I'd known it for days. But hearing him say it made it real. We'll never make it 200 miles on foot, I said. No, Aldridge agreed. We probably won't.